I'd like to share some thoughts about the implications of the pandemic for sustainable tourism. What I want to look at is the process of going through survival, which is where most destinations are at the moment, through recovery, and then perhaps to say a few words about renewal. There's some straws in the wind around what's happening there with the renewal agenda. So I'm going to begin by talking about travel and tourism and the journey that's at the heart of the tourism experience. After all, a tourism experience is about going to experience somebody else's place. I'm going to talk about trust, the new currency of travel. I'm going to talk about the process of keeping in touch, of maintaining and creating motivation for destination marketing organisations. Look briefly at the challenge of the market, particularly from the UK. Look at the balance between marketing and management as we move forward, and look at the opportunities for maintaining contact with old markets and the dangers of that, and the opportunities with new markets. So to begin, I want to talk about the journey, because this issue of the future of tourism is not just a destination problem. You've got tourism and day visitors. You've got people who stay overnight and people who come just for the day. If people are going to come a significant distance, they've either got to travel from home to the airport or to the railway station. They've got to get from home to their point of departure. They've got to get through the airport or through the railway station. They've got to get on the plane. They've got the arrival at the other end. They've got the transfer at the other end. They've got accommodation. And then, of course, to enjoy the destination, they've got to go out and mix with the local population, so that perceptions of how safe a destination is to be in are part of it, but it's also about the journey and the people they will meet along the way. On top of that, you've got the risk of being locked down at home, perhaps not able to travel because you're in a hot zone, perhaps locked down in the destination, and then the risk on your return of being locked out because there are no flights, or facing quarantine on return and unable to work. And if you can't work from home, that can be a very costly business. And the third area of difficulty is you've got the issue of insurance and refunds if things go wrong. Those have been major issues for UK travellers, and they have been around the world. And then there's the problem of the high levels of uncertainty with constantly changing travel advisories, and the pandemic itself increasing and decreasing intensity in different destinations with time. So that even planning the trip becomes far more problematic than it used to be, let alone taking the trip. So it's not just a destination issue. I think it's fair to say that trust is now the new currency of tourism. There's a lot of trust required, and there's a long chain of providers in our complex sector. I need to trust those I'll be meeting with while I'm traveling and in the destination. It's not just what the provider, the business does, it's what the other people around me are doing. It is, after all, the other people who are the risk for me of catching Covid-19. For a long time, we've been able to assume that our safety is guaranteed, that we don't need to worry. So much so that significant numbers of people have until recently been willing to travel to areas with malaria without taking any prophylactics or precautions, and a few have got sick as a result. Covid-19, though, is much more infectious, and we can't ignore the fact that it was spread by travellers returning from studying or holiday making, or some of them on business trips abroad. Host communities are understandably afraid of people bringing COVID into their communities. So travel used to be a risky business a long time ago. It's been not risky for a long time, but it's risky again now. And we need to think really hard about how we can encourage people to travel in those circumstances. One of the challenges for destination marketing organisations at the moment is to ensure that you maintain the connections you have with the people who visited previously. And that means about both maintaining contact and creating motivation to travel again. And here are three examples from Visit Scotland, one of my favourite destinations. And clearly, it's that notion of those unbeatable landscapes combined with the cultural heritage of Scotland, which makes it so attractive. But you'll see that what they've done is also to add their preparedness for looking after travellers when they arrive in Scotland, whether they're on holiday or business. with this campaign around "We're good to go," meaning that the businesses have taken on board the advice for making travel and staying and visiting COVID-19 safe, or as safe as it can be. The fourth thing I wanted to talk about is the challenge of the market. And it's clear that there's been much more coverage of tourism in the feature pages and on the front pages of the newspapers. It feels as though it's there every other day. This obviously increases uncertainty. But on top of that, we've got the risk of economic crisis, of unemployment. And some papers, you see the Express there, talking about the risk of a Great Depression again, which will undermine the ability to travel because people simply won't have the disposable income to do so. On that graph, you can see that between June and July, there was a significant drop of 24% in the willingness of people to travel by plane, and a drop of 23% in people's willingness to travel by plane. That's really unhelpful. The unwillingness of people to risk the transport to get from home to the destination is why in the UK now, car travel movements are up nearly to what they were. They're within 90% of what they were before the COVID pandemic hit. Only 12% of those over 65 are considering traveling abroad, and 75% say they feel uneasy about flying, a big increase since June. If we look at the particular effect it's having on British tourism, you can see here the figures for people who would be willing to consider particular destinations and those who are not considering them because of the COVID-19 coronavirus. And those figures are dramatic. 53% of people saying they're not thinking, not willing to go to the USA because of the coronavirus, 46% not prepared to go to China, and so on. And of course, it's very much the same in terms of inbound travel to Britain. 52% of Spaniards are not willing to come, 48% of Danes, 43% of Finns, 50% of Swedes. So the COVID-19 having a big impact on willingness to travel. You can also see that it's not evenly spread across the world. America, China are both more dramatically hit by a dislike of travellers from that destination. So if we take Spain as an example, 75% of Spaniards don't want to see visitors from the US, 68% from China, 61% from the UK. And that varies slightly by destinations, but the unwillingness to, the uncomfortable sense that they don't want people to come from particular source markets where perhaps COVID-19 is seen as being more prevalent is very strong. Will this have a long-term impact on the organic image we have of destinations? I don't know, but a lot of people are seeing those films of Americans, Italians, Spaniards in their own home, as it were, and seeing the way that they're behaving in the context of COVID-19 is bound to have an impact. Here's two contrasting examples from Spain. Urena is a small village. There, they're very reluctant to accept travellers in a place which has got, they say, more bookshops than restaurants and cafes. Formentera, by comparison, is obviously extremely keen to have large numbers of tourists return. So this is going to vary by place within destinations as well. It's not just a national or a regional issue. It will vary by people's sense of how vulnerable they are to external visitors bringing COVID-19 with them. Health is taking priority in Africa. The Gambia is closed, so is South Africa. They've just lifted the interprovincial travel ban, but nonetheless, the airports are still closed. That's had, in both cases, it's had a really dramatic impact on the fortunes of the tourism industry. And in both the Gambia and South Africa, the industry is very much on its knees. In Venice, we're seeing again mass protests against mass tourism. Perhaps inevitable. People have seen what it's like without mass tourism, and nature is taking back Venice. The wildlife is returning. That must make it a much more attractive place for local people. But of course, Venice is heavily dependent, and the whole of the Venice Lagoon is highly dependent upon tourism. So it's difficult to know whether the tourist numbers will be kept low in the future, or whether it will go back to business as usual quite quickly. But the local population has been reminded of what it was once like without tourism. Then comes this question of the balance between marketing and management. Who manages a destination? Who makes, if you take a responsible tourism perspective, who is responsible for using tourism to make better places for people to live in? And of course, better places to live in are better places to visit, but only up to a point, because if there are very large numbers of tourists, that reduces the attractiveness of the place to live in. So is tourism a good thing? It varies. People's perceptions will be difficult, but political support for tourism may be reduced as more and more people, more and more voters in destinations are reminded of what it's like not to have large numbers of tourists. Overtourism is a consequence of many years of us doing no more than paying lip service to the principle and the idea of sustainability. So some national tourist offices and tourist boards are moving from promotion to marketing, and seeing marketing now as a management tool and using marketing to shape the kinds of tourists who are attracted and those who are discouraged. Overtourism is still a massive issue. These are examples of overtourism during the period of Covid-19, and in some cases at the height of the lockdown. The photograph in the middle there from China is what happened as soon as the lockdown was released in China. Very large numbers of people ended up going back to the tourist hotspots, local people, but nonetheless overtourism, not international visitors, local domestic tourism. Amsterdam and Partners is looking about changing the way in which Amsterdam functions for tourists, and wanting to make Amsterdam an even better place to live, work and visit. They've got lots of ideas. They're beginning to be implemented. There's a sympathetic city government and mayor. In terms of old markets, Magaluf has suffered very much from the old market coming back really quickly. They thought that they got some control over it by putting in legislation against what they call trash tourism. But very quickly, Magaluf returned to business as usual, with young British and German tourists arriving, drinking alcohol in the streets and dancing on the cars. We'll see what happens there, but the law against the tourism of excesses, as it was described, has not been successful in curbing that kind of behaviour. Barcelona has put considerable effort into rediscovering Barcelona for locals, putting on special trips to enable people from the region to revisit Barcelona and experience it, with a whole range of activities, products and experiences with discount for local people. Then there's the possibility of finding new markets. Prague is looking for a different type of visitor after the lockdown. We're seeing similar things in other destinations. Barbados looking for new residential tourists. In Italy, looking for building on the slow food movement in Italy, looking for people who are wanting to walk through the Italian countryside and bring prosperity and incomes to rural areas. Bordeaux rebranding itself as a responsible tourism destination with lots of new experiences for people, giving people the opportunity to mingle with locals and enjoy the gentle way of life of France's southwest region while travelling in an ecological and sustainable way. That's a city rebranding itself for the post-COVID world. Kerala, set to go local, and the Isle of Wight looking for people who will travel with respect, who will protect the Isle of Wight and who will enjoy it in a sustainable way. And Spain bringing in a responsible tourism logo for those businesses which are adopting enhanced COVID-19 security measures. So we're seeing a movement from survival through recovery slowly, and perhaps some renewal. I'm less optimistic that many destinations will change as a result of COVID-19. I think there'll be a rush back to business as usual, but it's clear that some destinations are making a concerted effort to change. We won't get back to the new normal, or whatever the new normal is going to be, at least until there's an effective treatment or a vaccine. We need to recognise that there is at best more ambivalence about tourism, that some aspects of sustainability will be enhanced in some places, but in others it will be further delayed because of the economic crisis which is going to follow. The other thing which in some ways I feel apologetic for raising, but I think I should. This is a map showing the number of outbreaks of epidemics over the last 50 years. And what you can see is there's been a significant number of them, and that they've been accelerating. So between 2011 and 2018, the World Health Organization tracked close to 1,500 epidemic events in 172 countries. And what they're saying in an official official international report is that there's a new era of high impact, potentially fast spreading outbreaks that are more frequently detected and increasingly difficult to manage. And of course, what we can't ignore in the travel and tourism sector is that we've played a role, our sector has played a role in spreading COVID-19 around the world, and we will with future epidemics too, turning epidemics into pandemics as people travel more easily around the world. I hope that's been useful. If you want to keep up with what's happening in responsible tourism, go to our website and consider subscribing to Responsible Tourism News.